Appreciate you spending time with us this morning. And as you researched this story, what was the anecdote or the detail that felt the most uncomfortable to you?
Well, there were the one that really bothered me. One that bothered me slightly was the fact that these women were posing basically topless at times, and sponsors were able to get really close to the photo shoots and see the women topless. That bothered me, of course. But the one anecdote that really stuck out was that one evening after practice, the team cheerleading director had called 9 women out by name and said they have to wait after practice, and said, you have an assignment tonight to go out to a nightclub. Sponsors have requested you. They've handpicked you to come out to the nightclub with them, basically to party with them. Some of the women started crying. They were calling their parents. They said they wanted to go home. They just said that they felt like it was the Redskins pimping them out.
These both seem like really weird, bizarre things for a team to ask cheerleaders to do. I mean, I've been around a lot of NFL cheerleaders in terms of community events and charity events. Asking them to pose nude with people watching, like spectators watching, or chaperone late-night events seems really odd. Does this happen more often than we think, or is this an isolated event for Washington?
I don't think it's an isolated event for the Redskins. It happened not just in that year where they went to Costa Rica. It happened in the previous years and subsequent years. I think it's the part of the cheerleading programs, the NFL cheerleading programs, that we don't see as normal fans who might be at the stadium and the women are signing their calendars or autographs. Of course, their main function is to dance on the sidelines during the game and be a cheerleader. They also do community outreach with hospitals, going to overseas on military tours, but we don't see what happens when they go on these calendar trips or these other promotions that their teams send them on, which could be a few years ago the Redskins sent 6 girls to somebody's house, and that when they got there were 7 guys sitting there watching television, and immediately they asked, which one of you are married and which of you are single. So that's not exactly in the contract. When the Redskins cheerleaders become Redskins cheerleaders, they don't sign up to be escorts. That sort of should be a bottom line, or should be where people cross the line.
Yeah, it's so disturbing considering this is the NFL and they fly the American flag every single Sunday, and then they're utilizing cheerleaders for what feels to be very compromised, ridiculous situations, which should not be. I wonder, as you noted in this article, Dan Snyder, when he bought the team, started pushing the envelope with his cheerleaders, and they became more risque and more about sex, and they did hot or not on their website, and they had these breathy ads. Is this the after effect 20 years later of Washington as a franchise continuing to push the boundaries of sex with its cheerleaders?
Yeah, I think they might have been pushing the boundaries for a long time. We had somebody on Twitter respond to the story saying that he had been the copy editor on their calendars for many years, and he said starting about 2000 he was asked, he'd noticed that there are actually words in the calendar, I've been told. But those words were, he said they wanted to have them more risque, have them more sexy. And, this is just the way Dan Snyder wants to market his team. I don't know if it's just the Washington Redskins. I get the feeling that it's not. But he wanted it to be more sexy and less family friendly. And I guess he certainly succeeded.
What purpose does it serve to have the women topless? Was this for the calendar? Were they in body paint?
Well, some of them were in body paint. They're asked, do you want to wear the body paint? And some of them raise their hand, and then they choose which one would look better in body paint, I'm told. But when you're doing these shoots, sometimes they have the women, even though it's supposed to be a swimsuit calendar, they're not wearing any tops for their bikini, so they have strategically placed hats or shoulder pads or something, but the fact is it's not like their top is covered. They're not holding these things up against their breasts the whole time, and you could see everything if you're standing at the shoot. And some of the women were saying it was really bothersome to them when these male sponsors were standing around, and the other cheerleaders were trying to make a human barricade around their teammates so these men couldn't see see the women when they posed. I mean, they're very sexy poses for one, even in these little tiny bathing suits. But when you're topless and you're trying to strategically place shells or whatever else they had, hats, for the picture, it's awkward. And one thing I wanted to say was that these women agreed to doing this swimsuit shoot, and it was a lot of them looked at it as a perk, but they didn't expect to have these male sponsors leering at them the whole time. That's where they said it went downhill.
Yeah, it just feels like the height of creepiness. Juliet Macur joins us here on the show for the New York Times. There also seems to be a huge risk of liability here if NFL teams are putting their cheerleaders at risk, not only of people watching them do things that are partially nude, but also making them chaperones for late-night visitations or going out on the town or going to houses where dudes are asking who's single. I mean, could just the simple litigation or liability, rather, kind of force the NFL to have to totally shift what it allows its cheerleaders to do?
Well, I don't know whether the NFL would be liable. I'm not a lawyer. I don't even play one on TV, so I don't know. So I think the NFL's response to all of these stories that we've been writing about cheerleaders is that they don't govern the cheerleaders, because not every NFL team has cheerleaders anymore. But what the Redskins, I don't know what the Redskins will be doing from now on, but it's maybe they'll argue that these women did this voluntarily. That's what they said in the story, was that these 9 women who were handpicked to go to this club with the sponsors were not handpicked, that many of them wanted to go, and they all went voluntarily, and they had a good time. It was so much fun, but that's certainly not what the sources I talked to have said. And since the story ran just yesterday, I've had a number of Redskins cheerleaders on that trip add their voice to the story, saying, like, you had it exactly right. That happened, and it was a scary. We felt unsafe and intimidated, and it was something that we felt very unprotected by the Redskins.
So those that came forward after this story was published reaffirmed how disturbing this whole thing was. It wasn't like you got a whole bunch of women saying, no, you had it colored wrong. We actually really enjoyed it. Most of them, or all of them that contacted you, said, no, this was really bad.
Well, we had 2 cheerleaders that the Redskins had handed to us for the story, and they were captains at the time. They went out on this nightclub trip with the sponsors, and they said they had a good time. They said it's part of the business, getting to talk to the sponsors. They talk to the sponsors. They walk away. They said they were grown women. They decide what to do and what not to do. So not everybody said it was a horrific experience, but there are now a growing number of women who said it was obviously. They felt unsafe, uncomfortable. They didn't want to do it. Obviously, it wasn't in their contract. And so the Redskins obviously dispute a lot of the things in the story, but that's not what I'm hearing from a growing number of women who are actually on the trip.
Juliet Macur from the New York Times, who wrote the piece on this cheerleader situation, joining us this morning on the show. Juliet, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Juliet Macur, New York Times.